I click.
I can also check on my phone.
There we go. We are live right now, actually. We are live.
Perfect.
Great.
Perfect. So Julia.
I feel like the air has changed now that we know that we're live.
Yes, definitely. Okay, well, let me begin. Welcome everybody to the second edition of GAD Talk Series number 2. Today's talk is entitled Where is GAD? An open conversation on migration as art practitioners. So GAD Talk Series, just a little intro about that. It's a series of open conversation with the global art community during this pandemic. Last time we have covered an introduction to GAD's history and presence in the emerging UAE art scene. And this time we'll switch it up and talk about the global in GAD, aka migration, the difficulties and benefits of working internationally as it relates to identity and belonging. We are joined today by a distinguished panel, incredibly diverse, coming from Miami to Tokyo, passing by London, Abu Dhabi, even the road from Abu Dhabi to Dubai. So all of our panelists today have moved across continents to pursue their creative careers and have overcome obstacles along the way that oftentimes left some marks and mission statements in their respective practices. They have also all contributed to GAD in some form or another. So for that, I am very grateful to all of you. I'm also thankful that you accepted today's invitation. So I'll present the panelists, and then I'll just give a quick presentation on GAD's kind of history throughout the 5 years we've been in existence. I'll try to keep it short, and then we'll have time for this conversation. So first we have Augustine Paredes, who's a Filipino artist and photographer based in Dubai, UAE. Augustine's lyrical visual narratives are derived from his many storied travels, Southeast Asian consciousness, and central gaze. In 2020, he published an artist book titled Conversations at the End of the Universe in Dubai, and has previously exhibited at the International Summer School of Photography in Zalemieki, Latvia, at the Obscura Festival of Photography in Malaysia, and in Art Dubai. He's also photographer, and his photographs have been featured in publications such as Vogue Arabia, Canvas Magazine, GQ Middle East. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Mass Communication from Ateneo de Davao University in Davao, Philippines. Then we have Ana Bernice. Ana Bernice is a Filipina multidisciplinary performance artist, freelance creative consultant, and arts researcher based in Dubai. Her emerging career has taken her to Berlin, New York, and Prague to collaborate and work with various companies in the arts, culture, and social impact sector. Her writings have been featured in Vice Arabia, amongst other publications. Interested in the interplay between social research and artistic expression, her research field includes decolonization, intersectional feminism, and the nuances of belonging and identity. She has a BA in theater and social research and public policy with a focus on art history from New York University, Abu Dhabi, and has also received training at the Lee Strasberg Theater and Film Institute in New York City. Then we have Johan Munoz, who's a visual artist, curator, and educator from Bogota, Colombia, who lives and works in Miami, Florida. Johan is an interdisciplinary practitioner whose work encompasses drawing, photography, sculpture, installations, and pedagogy. His curatorial projects, which we featured on GAD, include A-Part, an international collective, domestic and alternative exhibition space, and Unfolding Series 1, a co-curating exhibition hosted by the Miami Biennial. Johan is an educator at Artbox and a mentor at Guitar Over Guns, a 501c3 arts nonprofit. He received his BFA in painting from the New World School of Arts in Miami, Florida. Then we have Daniel Ray, a managing editor at GAD. He's a Paraguayan Colombian curator based in Abu Dhabi. A digital native and polyglot, he's interested in cool hunting, radio, and contemporary art. Daniel was trained in the visual and performing arts in Norway and the Emirates. He was recently part of the 2020 Jameel Youth Assembly in Dubai, and has joined initiatives presented at the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi Project, Warehouse 421, and Abu Dhabi Art. Daniel also graduated from NYU Abu Dhabi with a BA in Theater and Social Research and Public Policy, and he advocates for artistic exchanges in the Global South. And last but not least, we have Julia Sobier, who's a Filipina-French actor, stuntwoman, international model, and creative based in London. Through her work, she expands the cultural narratives of women of color and explores themes of violence, female friendship, and intimacy. She currently trains at the Identity School of Acting and Method Acting London and is represented by BMA artists in London and Elite in Manila. Julia graduated with a degree in social research and public policy and film and new media production from NYU Abu Dhabi, and a master's in economics and management with a focus on Chinese cinema at Yanqing Academy of Peking University, Beijing. So quite a distinguished panel. We have a lot of NYU AD graduates. We have also a lot of Filipino representation, which I'm very happy about. Quite a mouthful. It's a lot. What I'm going to do.
And Colombian. I feel like the room is split between the Philippines and Colombia, Sophie. So make a pick.
It's South, talking about South. It's really a South panel. I'll just quickly.
Most countries have been colonized too by Spaniards as well.
True. There's a lot of similarities. So here we go. I'm gonna share my screen. And just present a little bit about GAD. So, can you all see it? Perfect. So GAD, it's been 5 years of GAD. You've seen the progression, the logos have changed. I started GAD when I was a sophomore at NYU Abu Dhabi. And I really tried to create this global platform for contemporary art criticism. But truly, it was kind of this grand idea, but what I wanted to do is, I was in Abu Dhabi. I'm personally half Swiss, half Japanese, grew up in a lot of different places. My dad used to work at the International Red Cross, so we moved around a lot. As a child, and so GAD for me was a way to connect with people, with cultures, through the arts. And so one major connection I tried to build in the beginning was the connection between Abu Dhabi and New York. And one of the first contributor here was Tiffany Liu, honorary contributor. She used to study at the Gallatin School in New York City. And then Abu Dhabi, I thought, this was one of the first articles I wrote for GAD. Like, if there was ever a city that would be home of the first global art museums, it would be Abu Dhabi, just because it's a city that attracted, a lot of us on this panel. It's a city with a lot of immigrants, and it's a city that also values, through its leadership, global thinking. And so you can see it through the museums that they've built. You can see it through the education institutes that they've built as well. And I also, through that, I started to look at the local art scene in Abu Dhabi, started to interview local artists like Khaleya Al-Mansouri here. Then we went, it was a lot of New York. It was more and more contributors from the NYU network that started to join GAD. We featured Buenos Aires street art. We featured 2018 Chris Benton's installation, who is part of our first talk series, other events in Berlin. And then GAD issue 1, that was really our milestone moment of getting a first print issue out in Tokyo. So I moved from Abu Dhabi to Tokyo to pursue this master's degree. And this issue was all about, it's called Street Futures. It's all about street art. And I thought of, for me, I really like to look at the kind of outcasts of the institutional art world and kind of see how the outsiders can get inside, etc. Like I found that quite interesting. And so, and also, the global aspect. I try to source articles from Tokyo, from Shanghai, from Buenos Aires, and I could see the excitement that contributors would have to contribute to a Tokyo-based magazine. We interviewed Sidecore, for example, who's like this big art collective here in Japan, and the magazine traveled all the way to Buenos Aires. And then we had their second issue, All Girls Are Spicy, which was really an ode to what I call spice, which is kind of woman of color, non-binary, with like some kind of a celebration of womanhood. And we had contributions again from everywhere. I'll go through some of them. Shirin Neshat was a huge interview we scored. We had this incredible advertorial with Trashy Clothing, which is a streetwear brand based in Palestine. We had American Beauty, that was our cover shoot, directed by Blair Cannon and shot by Heather Hazan. Incredible photo shoot, redefining the Asian American face. And then we had Julia, who actually contributed an article. She interviewed Toka, this Filipino brand, sustainable brand. They revindicate their island identity. And they actually premiered their first collection at the Manila Biennial. And we also shot their first collection in Tokyo, which was really cool. And then we brought this Dubai photographer, Ali Al-Shihabi, to shoot this this really cool editorial. And I tried my hardest to get the magazine to spread it out into these incredible bookstores. I'm so thankful that places like the Art Book at MoMA PS1 picked us up. Tsutayati's site in Tokyo, it's a really renowned art bookstore here. And my message was always, GAD as a, it almost became a platform, right, for emerging artists and curators to interact with established voices as much as I could, create some dialogue. That's what I wanted to do. And then 2020 happened, and then we kind of relaunched everything. We did an inaugural e-issue on Abu Dhabi, Dubai. Danny joined the team. We did this incredible interview with Hashil Alamki, who graced our cover with his painting here. It was really incredible. And that's when a lot of these discussions started to happen. And that's, Augustine's article written by Danny. It'll be linked in the description box, but I really recommend that you read it. We also covered A Part and Johan Munoz's new exhibition project. And then Bernice actually contributed an article. She reviewed Chris Benton's curated show in Dubai. And I think that is it. I'll stop sharing my screen now. I just wanted to give that as a little visual intro. And now I'll go into the questions. I've talked for a long time. So let me start. Okay, so I kind of already presented you guys, but can you describe in your own words, where are you from? Where have you lived in your life? Where do you live now? And most importantly, how do you identify yourself when people ask you this ever complicated question, where are you from? How do you answer? Anybody can start, please. Take the floor.
Sophie, I'll take it. I'll break the ice for us. Look, I think, in my case, my parents are Colombian with a mix as well. And I was raised in Paraguay and moved to Uruguay, did high school in Norway, and then came to the UAE for school while going to Germany and the US. So that's 7 countries at age 22, right on it. Now, when Haschel, one of the artists that you mentioned earlier, and I were having this conversation, that actually, for me, the places that make me be where I'm from are the places where I feel, that I can navigate the city locally and just know my streets and know my spots. But I came down also to realize that the place where you first experience the world, the place that awakened your senses, even if you're from there or not, deserves a lot of credit. Like, as much as I was born in Colombia, I first smelled, like I have vivid memories from Paraguay. And that place has a huge responsibility in how I first experienced the world and ultimately ended up going into the arts. So when people are like, where are you from? I'm like, well, the way I see the world is technically shaped in Paraguay. So that makes me be more from there than from anywhere else. But there are on the way many transformational experiences. As of now, I am Colombian Paraguayan because I speak to my family's history as much as I speak to the place that I grew up in and the place that I contribute to. I'm very curious to see who replies to this. I don't know. I see Julia smiling, so that might be the call.
Nice handoff there. No, I love what you said about like giving the place that brings you consciousness some credit. I can definitely relate to that. I think for me, my dad's French and my mom is from the Philippines. I was born in France, grew up in the Philippines. I went to an international school, and I think just by virtue of how I look, the fact that I'm not completely fluent in French, I think one of the main questions that really preoccupied, my adolescence was, how do I fit in with my French identity? And at that point, we live in such a globalized world where there's an opinion, a thought value, a perspective that is more appreciated. And I'm just going to call it out. It's typically Western, it's typically white. And so I was always trying to insert myself in that conversation and relate to that question of how am I international? How do I fit into this global identity? How do I fit and relate to my French identity inside? Then I moved to the UAE, pursued my university over there, moved to London afterwards, and then moved to China. In between, there are different places that I worked, studied, pursued opportunities. So I think that brought the tally up to like 10 places that I had lived in at that point at 24. But I think it wasn't until I moved to China that I really began to identify with my Asian side. So the question shift from, okay, how do I identify with this more like global narrative? How do I relate to my French identity? To really, wait a second, how do I relate to being Asian? And how do I relate to being Filipino? Because I had always taken that for granted. It was a more kind of salient aspect of my identity based on how I look, the fact that I grew up in the Philippines. And so I had always just assumed that I was from the Philippines, and didn't really take such an intimate and I guess investigative interrogation into what that actually meant. But being in China really like catalyzed that identification with my Asianness and trying to understand what it meant for me and trying to assert that narrative into the global narrative. And so that's kind of where I'm at. I'd say, like, interestingly, it was, I'm a stunt woman, and a lot of my physical practices were kind of the entryway into my creative thought, my creative practice, and a way for me to really connect to this identity of where am I from, because a lot of these physical practices were Asian, Kung Fu, Kali, which is, Asian martial arts. So those are my thoughts on where I'm from, my identity. Although it's such a loaded and huge question, I'm sure all of us can go on and on and on and on about it.
Mm-hmm. How about you? Maybe Bernice? Yes, I see you.
Yeah, I was actually going to follow that thought that Julia raised. So I'm Bernice. I was born and raised in the Philippines, and similarly to Julia, when I was 14, 15, I started going to an international school. So before that, I was homeschooled by my mom, who I think is watching right now, and was very much taught by her actually to really find value in learning how to speak English, because in the Philippines, it's very much almost like a way to have upward social mobility if you can present yourself and portray yourself in English. So when people like Danny actually ask me, like, in what language do you think in? Fortunately or unfortunately, I do think a lot in English, but the last couple of months, actually, now that I've been living in Dubai, I've been interacting with more Filipinos, and that kind of intersection of both languages and the way that I think has been kind of mixing together, especially because in the workplace, I work with a lot of Filipinos. So I went to an international school for 5 years, and then I moved to the UAE for university. And in that international school, it was mostly Western centric. I went to school with a lot of Europeans. I went to school with a lot of Americans. And that's kind of where my accent comes from, which is a whole different layer, I think, to my identity, because every time I meet people, they're like, oh, like, did you grow up in America? And it's always like such a loaded, complicated question of like, do I owe you my history if we're just meeting? How much of that should I expose to you, and how do I move in spaces, and how am I understood in spaces depending on how I'm perceived with the way that I portray myself. And like Danny and Julia and Sophie, I also moved around a lot during university. So I lived in Germany and Czech Republic, in the US, through my education, and now I've moved to Dubai to work. And a lot of that travel has influenced my artistic practice in a way that kind of, I don't want to say decolonized, so to speak, but de-Americanized my ideas and perception of art making and art collaboration, because in the Philippines, it's very much American influenced. And having been able to travel and meet people from different places, I think allowed me to be a lot more out of the box in my thinking. And recently having, living in Dubai and practicing here in Dubai and meeting artists like Augustine has really taught me how to interrogate my Filipino-ness a lot, because my journey to where I am now is very different from the journeys of other Filipinos who work here. And I think in an everyday, mundane basis, I always interrogate my relationship with other overseas Filipino workers in Dubai, and how we are the same or how we are different, and how I navigate that difference. And I think that very much floods into my artistic practice in the way that I try to be sensitive to my histories, but also honor the complexities of my identity as a result. So,
beautiful. I hear a lot of the American talk. Maybe Johan, can you jump in and talk about where you come from in a few words?
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Johan Munoz. I was born in Bogota, in Colombia. I am currently based in Miami, Florida. I have always identified with, and Danny, I think, could connect with this as well, with the Facundo Cabral song, No soy de aquí, no soy de allá. I am not from here and I'm not from there. I feel like I live in between places, both physically and mentally. I sort of have this split personality, split identity. I think very much like Bernice was just mentioning, I also think into languages, and I think that transforms your overall understanding and perspective of the world. I've been living in the States for about 20 years. There is, I think, also a process of assimilation that shapes your identity. And I think I have, I went through all of that process. I think also I now very much have set myself on this journey to reconnect with my Colombian heritage. And I think I also, I think now that we have this opportunity to understand our DNA, our blood quantums and whatnot, I very much identify with the history of colonization in the Americas, right? So we are people that are also a bunch of people, right? We have indigenous blood, we have West African or Central African blood, we have European, Ibero Peninsula blood, as well as Native American blood sort of coursing through our veins. And I think this complicates being able to pin what identity is. There's, I think, many efforts right now being done about what it means to be Latinx, what it means, what Latinidad means. So I think, if anything, I think it's always a work in process, and that's very much how I feel my identity is.
Thank you for that. And then Augustine, if you can join.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Augustine. I'm sorry if anyone is hearing it. Whatever. Let's move on. I have a very I made work about the question, where are you from, during my exhibit in Art Dubai last year. And I would go as far as saying that the question, where are you from, is violent, because it kind of especially in the context of being asked as a migrant worker here in Dubai, it becomes this the country almost that you come from almost becomes this label of who you should be as a person. And I think that's a very dangerous question, and I'm still trying to explore ways in how to ask the question, where are you from, without loading it with many different violences that come with it. But yeah, that's really what I'm thinking of when I'm asked, where are you from. My initial thoughts would be what are you trying to get from me? And also it's what are you trying to know? What label are you trying to put me in? What box are you trying to put me in? And that's something that I always think about when I'm asked, where are you from? Because through and through, I'm Filipino, my skin is brown, the way I speak English is okay, it has a little bit of accent, but I'm proud of that. It's where I come from. And this has inspired me to create work, because I am not the only one who's being asked, where are you from? A lot of people, not only Filipinos, a lot of people are asked where they're from, especially when they look different in the countries that they visit, in the countries that they step foot in the places that they're not supposed to belong in according to them. So yeah, that's my relationship with the question, where are you from? And I think to unravel these violences of the question, we need to, I hate to say it, but like we need to decolonize our ways of thinking, and that's a hard thing to do, and that takes a lot of undoing. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah. No, thank you for raising these points, because that jumps into the second question, which is, have you ever felt boxed in a certain national or ethnic category as an artist? You know, have you ever felt a responsibility, a pressure, or a pride, perhaps, to represent your country or countries in your artworks, articles, exhibitions, films? I mean, maybe like, yeah, Augustine, I have you here. So have you ever felt boxed in this Filipino artist narrative?
I never felt boxed in until I went to Dubai. Like at first I was, but even still in the Philippines, you still get asked where are you from, because the Philippines is an archipelago, has 7,100 islands. And these places have many different languages, they have many different dialects. And when you come to Manila for an art show, you'll be asked, oh, where are you from? And then you say, oh, I'm from Davao. And then you get asked, like, oh, why is your accent not Bisaya? And Bisaya is like Bisaya or Ilonggo or Hiligaynon. These are dialects from the Philippines, and they sound very different from each other. So in that context, you will always get boxed in as someone, because there's this imperialist thinking wherein the people from the south of the Philippines is not really as great as the Filipinos in Manila. This is just my observation, and this is what has been taught to me over time. And so for me, especially when I was here in Dubai, it felt like this whole burden of trying to prove my Filipino-ness is worth anything, is worth something, became like this whole pressure. Trying to, I always say in my applications for like institutions like Campus Art Dubai or CEF, that like, you need to stop thinking that Filipinos belong to the back of the kitchen, because unfortunately that's where, you see everyday Filipinos are. And that's not something that, like, being in an art institution and being in the art industry, it's rare for you to see Filipinos here. So like for me, it's mostly that, like, proving that there's something in my Filipino-ness, and I need to take pride in that. And it's somehow my responsibility to put my Filipino-ness at the heart of my work. So yeah.
Yeah, and that makes sense. It's like more of a pride, And I think I want to hear Julia talk about this point, because I feel like you had a different story when you went back to Manila, and then maybe you felt boxed in at a certain point, and then you felt the need to go to London afterwards. Maybe you can talk about this.
Yeah, I just wanted to also respond to what was said about the question, where are you from, being violent. I think that so many of us have such awful and traumatic associations to that question, because they're so loaded. And sometimes, as Augustine was saying, they come with like a set of assumptions and stereotypes that people are just waiting to project onto you. I think, it's one thing to approach that question with genuine curiosity and interest and, equanimity. And there's another approach, which is like, all right, wait a second, let me give my brain like 10 seconds to just calculate how much respect I should award you, because you're from X country, so that must mean XYZ. And it's like, when it's that second thing of like, wait, let me just do this internal calculation on how much respect I should award you based on your qualifiers, your identity, whatever, that's when it's like, hey, that's not cool. And I think for a lot of us that belong to like multiple places, or maybe don't necessarily fit the conventional mold, that question is like often associated with someone doubting your identity. It's not even like a question, let me offer this up to you so you can explain and share your heritage. It's like, it's actually a mechanism for them to doubt who you are, because that question is often like inflicted with a tone of doubt, or like, like kind of like disbelief, like, oh, you're actually from there. So I think having like such violent and like traumatic associations to that question makes it like inherently quite violent. But I think that when someone approaches it with like genuine curiosity, it can like open up itself to like genuine and awesome conversation. But yeah, so thanks for bringing that up, Augustine. I think for me, this idea of being boxed in, like being Asian and being Filipino is really central to my work. I think that my identity, my nationality, and my racial identity are my most salient kind of qualifiers. And I think, even though they are like, in some sense, like static or inherent to you, like I will always be French Filipino. I'm never not going to be French, or I'm never not going to be Filipino. But they're actually, in fact, never static, because they're always evolving and changing. Like what we were saying, like different localities, different environments, different experiences shape and verify that identity. But for me, that will always be the core of my like artistic practice and my creative work, regardless of how that's experienced or how that's shaped, because it's kind of the whole reason why I got into film and TV. I felt like, personally, I mean, I'm sure all of us feel that culture has this incredible opportunity to shape conversation and to really shape our sense of possibility and our sense of power. Not just like power in the world in terms of hierarchies and social systems, but personal power. Like where do we have agency and autonomy, and where do we have power within ourselves? And the dominant cultural narrative that I grew up with was one where people like me and Filipinos and Asians in general were not cool. We're not aspirational. Our voices and our perspectives are not important, because when you have this idea and this question of representation it's not really about like, representation, the word. It's literally about a hierarchy of thinking and of being. And like people who are represented and stories that are represented tell us in some way that those are the stories and the people that are aspirational and inspirational. Those are the perspectives that matter. And so to me, inserting myself in this conversation, inserting myself in this cultural narrative, and bringing along other artists who share similar identities, it's about allowing them to feel like they are, expansive, that they have personal power, that they can take pride in who they are, and that doesn't limit who they can be. It's their source. It allows them the possibilities to be whoever they want to be. And so for me, it's really important to pay homage to my Filipino identity and to kind of express that and have that be at the core of my work. Even if I'm not necessarily telling Filipino stories or working on projects that are set in the Philippines, it's really about honoring that in whatever role or whatever capacity, and also really taking pride in it as well. I think that was a very long-winded answer.
Like the two answers, especially the first part when you where from. It's I mean, it's a lot of, we have so many great questions. We have so many great panelists. I want to maybe ask these questions to the Colombians, Latinos, Paraguayans in the panel. Maybe Danny, could you tell us, have you felt like you curating works, for example, works from Arab artists in Abu Dhabi? Have you ever felt like you come as a representative of Paraguay, of Colombia, or is that not even a question and you think you're, just a globally minded young curator?
Sophie, you're asking a very interesting question, because I feel like even if you don't want to represent a country or a region, and you just want to represent yourself, which is what most of us aim at, I still think that you're many people's first. You're the first person from Paraguay, from Colombia, from the Philippines, from Japan that they meet. You're the first person from your university that they meet. You're the first person who mixes photography and poetry like Augustine does, or the first person that mixes making music and curating like Johan does, or you know what I mean? I think you're someone's first regardless. And in my case, what I've found is that being a Latino which is also a very complex term, which many meanings and things packed into it, or being who I am, let's say, in the Arab region, particularly in the United Arab Emirates, allows me for a certain level of freedom that I don't quite have when I'm in the US or in Western Europe, because it's like, I am from the global South. I can kind of relate to what you've gone through in a way or the other. My family, religious, and cultural expectations are comparable. So I feel fairly comfortable here, curating Arab artists. But of course, there are things that I can't help but process in the languages that I speak. Like the other day, this artist was, talking to me about her work, and I just started saying these sayings in Spanish, and she was like, "Why?" And I was like, "Sorry, I just need to react to your work first in the language that I'm most comfortable in before I can actually try and make a much more elaborate comment in English about it." And I think curating or making work away from whatever you call home or whatever stage or scenario you grew up in requires both curiosity and responsibility. Curiosity because you have to be willing to listen, to watch, and to understand, but also responsibility because you never know what first and last impressions you're leaving behind. And I think the art world, it's now learning to be much more forgiving, but what if you are the only person with my identities that you'll meet, and I happen to make a mistake when I'm making artworks with you? What if you've had actually unpleasant experiences from other people from my region and my country? Is it my job to come and make it up for them? And I actually am very curious what Johan has to say about this. Granted that he's also from the same country where I was born, but based in Miami, which is a much more established scene and a much more cosmopolitan spot as well.
Thank you, Danny. Yeah, I mean, these questions for sure are very, very, very loaded. I think that I will say that there's a level of freedom that comes to identity when, in Miami at least. It is a really, really strange phenomenon because I think in one way or another, this city really, really thrives on diversity. In practically every industry, from arts to politics, you have people that look like me and speak the language, but we are in the US. So I think there is I think some sort of hope, or at least a blueprint in many respects for what the future of immigration is going to look like in this country overall. But I do notice, very much like Danny said, that as soon as I leave the sort of the safety of this pen, things change dramatically. I don't think that there's a country that I've ever traveled to as a Colombian national where I'm not pulled to a room aside and I'm just ask a bunch of questions, but I have to sort of empty all of my belongings and just kind of demonstrate that I'm just here for tourism and because I want to learn. So I think in many respects it's very hard to exercise what I think I have, which is a global mindset, in a place that is that restricts the fluidity that we all are striving for in one way or another. And then there is also specifically here in the US, the long, complicated history of migration that I think now in the current political climate has been more at the forefront, I think, than ever before. So I think if anything, as an art practitioner, that is really where I want to be, right? Like I want to be able to, in this journey of making art, in this journey sort of back home, as I mentioned earlier, going back to my Colombian-ness, I definitely feel like I want to challenge these ideas, these colonial histories, their influence on contemporary societies. I definitely want to be able to articulate some sort of like collective memory and solidarity and healing for people that look like me, that have a similar background. And yeah, sort of free yourselves from a lot of the trauma that we were talking about at the beginning of the talk.
Thank you for that. I mean, it's so good to have your perspective from the US and compare it to the UAE, because I feel like the UAE is almost like a young USA, like they're just opening up and they're just beginning their immigration story, and wait 500 years, maybe, you know, like things are, the USA, it's such a, it's an incredible, you know, I mean, the ultimate immigrant success story, but really an example to study from if you think of global thinking, and also the very, very difficult histories associated with that, as we can see, you know, in the political climate today. So maybe I'll just jump to the next question, which was, have you ever felt challenges in art sectors? I mean, it could be like, you know, an internship, it could be an exhibition or a film that you did, because you were foreigners or don't speak the native language, and how have you overcome that? Maybe we can hear from Bernice, because you skipped.
Yeah, for sure. So I, during my time at NYU Abu Dhabi, I was very fortunate to be exposed to a lot of experimental and contemporary theater and art companies who were very open to take international students, even if they didn't speak the language. So I interned in Prague with a theater festival, theater company, and a theater company. And I was very fortunate that the company itself everyone spoke English, but the wider community of art makers mostly all spoke Czech, and it became very hard for me to sort of penetrate into the young art scene because everyone spoke Czech and I just couldn't access the language. I wasn't there long enough to learn or take it in. So I think that for sure became a barrier. But more importantly, in a city like Berlin, so I also was able to help create work with a dance theater company there. And while Berlin is very global and very international and cosmopolitan, there are still certain sectors of the art community where German is still very inherent in the way that they communicate. So even if there are people from different parts of the world, different Europeans congregating together in Berlin, a lot of the art discussions still happen in German. Documents, bureaucracy is in German, emails are in German, computers are in German. Discussions are in German. So even if the company that I worked for had the Spanish woman, this guy from Colombia, a German, a Chinese woman, everyone, and another woman from Russia, everyone spoke German, and I was the only one who couldn't. And so they felt the need to shift their office speak in English when I interned there. And there were certain discussions that happened over tables where I just wouldn't know. And I speak a little bit of German, enough to, you know, buy groceries or get my ticket from the metro, but definitely not enough to ask questions. And, you know, people would call the office and I would pick up the phone and I have to sometimes gather all the German that I know to be able to have these conversations. So in many ways, it was a lot more challenging to encounter the art scene in that way. But in parallel, there are also other artists who are experiencing this, and it's about figuring out how to tap into those communities to be able to create work together, but still kind of find our own pockets of belonging in a city where, despite being global, despite being cosmopolitan, still find roots in the language of the country that it's in terms of making art. So that was definitely, I think, something that was a little difficult, even if, you know, you're made to think of these very cosmopolitan cities as open, which they are, but there are many ways in which transactions, whether bureaucratic or artistically, still happen in the mother language of that city.
And I can totally relate to that. Just moving myself from the UAE to Japan and living in Japan for the first time of my life, really, not knowing much Japanese, to be honest. I grew up speaking French, actually, from my father, Swiss father, and then learned English, and then NYU Abu Dhabi, and really me coming to Japan, trying to find my roots, my identity here, and just realizing how difficult, how quite insular and homogeneous this place is compared to other cities I've lived in, and that this idea of maybe Tokyo as a global city, it's a very Japanese city, and I can totally relate to, being in rooms where everybody speaks Japanese, whether it's in my master's program in curations, and trying to work around that. As you say, it's important, I think, to put yourself sometimes in these situations, because it forces you to learn, forces you to adapt, to understand something that you can then, it's part of your narrative. It'll always kind of, it'll be part of the story you tell to other people. You know, it's I feel like it's something that it's hard, but you have to kind of put yourself through it to also empathize, you know, with the other, with the big O. Anybody else wants to, if anybody else wants to have an answer to this question, the challenges of working internationally, maybe Julia in China, or maybe Johan or Augustine.
I wanted to share something, actually not working in China, because I think much of what Bernice said is covered under that kind of lens. But interestingly, I felt like, what's the opposite of that question? Like, how am I not foreign enough? When I was living in the Philippines, you know, the industry there, I'd say, is quite ironically whitewashed. And a lot of the times, like, I wouldn't be put forward for like a role or an opportunity in modeling, or I wouldn't book a commercial, or, you know, you look at the kind of the actors that are there, and often I felt like it boiled down to this question of me not being foreign enough, like not looking white enough, not being fair, not, you know, not ascribing to that physical look, and actually rejecting that. Like when people would say, okay, can you wear colored contacts? You know, can you do XYZ plastic surgery to like open up your eyes or make yourself look more foreign, get fillers, fix your nose? I was like, no, I'm not gonna do that, because like that is against like what I stand for. So I think that was a very like interesting question, going back to the Philippines and feeling like I wasn't foreign enough. And that's kind of why I was barred from opportunities, because just of how I look and how I don't necessarily look white or European or American. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, after that, I moved to London. So I'm here right now, that's where I'm based. And, you know, there's this idea that maybe, you know, you're not really owed a spot in their kind of cultural landscape because you don't really belong there. Like, I'm not British, but at the same time, it's like, well, I came to the UK right before Brexit, and you did have this ethos of being European, like when I entered. So how is this migration story going to be, you know, reframed like in 10, 20 years? Like, what impact will Europeans, or what kind of, I guess, like sense of belonging are they owed, or whatnot, because of this particular, you know, point in their history? And I think, you know, more than just thinking about the UK's kind of cultural, because obviously there's no language barrier. I speak English, and, you know, it's my primary kind of mode of operation, a language of operation rather. But I think, you know, the UK, I came here because a lot of the global productions are being filmed here. And this is, I don't see the cultural landscape as necessarily British. I mean, it is for sure, definitely. But there's also a huge onus and responsibility on their part to understand that, wait, this is actually a site of global production. And so what kind of responsibility and onus do we have to actually, you know, include other people in that conversation and in that cultural landscape? And I think that, you know, the thing that's maybe difficult about entering is not necessarily linguistic, but more kind of the implicit assumptions that people have or attached to you because of your nationality, because of your gender, because of how you look, or what. And so these are all questions I'm grappling with as well. But very fascinating, I think, to see one side and then the other.
For sure.
I have sorry, just to add on to that, maybe also I have like a very recent experience wherein I was photographing. So I have like a project I'm working on that involves truck drivers in Mina Zayed, and I don't speak Arabic and they don't speak English. So just getting out information is very hard to create work that is not, because like this is actually the first project that I am removing myself at the center of my work, and trying to look from the inside to the outside and trying to bring what the outside is into my form of practice. It kind of like created this barrier that I was not aware that existed, because I was always used to working with myself, and the language that I speak is the language that I write my thoughts into and present my work to. But also apart from that, like in that creating projects kind of, but can we treat in this conversation, are we allowed to treat queerness as a form of language? Because if we talk about queerness as a form of language, there is a lot of censorship in the places that I am involved in right now. So like for 4 years that I've been here in this city, I was always told to tone down, to not myself, but to tone down the content of my work, to remove certain images, to not publish this type of photographs, to not write or to not publish a certain poem online where everyone can see it. So I think if we go beyond words as a form of language, there's a lot of censorship that happens in the daily metaphorical languages that we are having, that we are using. So that's my main experience. Like if we treat queerness, and if we treat that as a form of language, as a form of communicating, there is definitely censorship. But yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Anybody else has something to add on this question, or maybe we can move on? There's so basically we have like 7 minutes left on this, but this conversation is so good. We can maybe try to go a little bit over time. We have a question from the audience actually. Sarah Daher saying, hi, thank you for your question. She says, love this panel. Something I think about a lot is the pressure to self-exoticize as a creative, the pressure to build a professional identity based on personal characteristics that traditionally imply hardship, being female, being Arab, being an Arab female. I think we touched upon that a little bit, but maybe if someone wants to add a little more, like, have you ever felt, it's kind of goes back to that boxed in question.
Yeah, I actually have very strong feelings about that comment, especially because Sarah and I have had conversations about this as women of color in the UAE, and how we feel the pressure of capitalizing on our identity as a way to make work or to exceptionalize ourselves. And it's a conversation I constantly have with other artists as well, where how do I sort of brand or market myself, in that sense, to be different, but also not to exoticize where I'm from or my experiences, knowing full well that I am not a sole representative of my people, of my identity, of my heritage, and how to not sort of bear that weight of representation, even if inherently, and I would quote Augustine on this, on his interview with Danny on GAD, about us as Filipinos taking up space in the art world inherently means that we represent Filipinos. But then my response to that as well is we always have to be very careful with how we do that, because not every Filipino artist is internationally educated. Not every Filipino artist works internationally. There are other Filipino artists in the diaspora who perform and practice either in the Philippines or in other contexts. And I think it would be so selfish of me to take up space and like say, and to feel like I'm the sole representative of my people, when that is not the case. So how do you find the healthy balance of sort of being proud of where you're from, crafting representation for people like you and the people that will come after you, but also being very careful that you don't take full ownership of that doesn't give other space to other nuanced identities of people who share similar identities with you. So I think it's a constant discussion for sure, especially being in a country like the UAE, which celebrates and thrives with the internationalness of its artists. But also we have to be very careful with how we are international in that way, I think.
I think you also raise a good point that, we have to also realize our privilege. I mean, we're talking about a lot of hardships of our identities, but we're also all of us quite privileged in the sense that we migrated. We had the economic means to do so. We pursued opportunities in places that, you know, perhaps a lot of people from our extended communities or genealogies or ancestors wouldn't have. And also we get to have this conversation, and we get to be global thinkers. I mean, whatever that means, the word global, I've tried to define it for the past years, I feel like, but I truly believe it. Like, this is my identity at the end of the day. I stand by this word global. I think it has incredible power, the fact that we can have this conversation, you know, from Miami to Tokyo and be on the same level. There are some benefits to this kind of lifestyle of migration. And so to maybe wrap it up, I just want to ask a last question. Maybe Johan, you can take it, or Danny, or someone else who hasn't spoken too much, about what advice would you give to people looking to build an international network in the art world or creative world, like residency programs, university education, social media? People, you know, watching this panel, they actually want to travel out of their hometowns. They want, I mean, now it's difficult with the pandemic, but, you know, they want to have these, Johan, you've had great experiences curating worldwide, really, and collaborating with all these artists. What advice would you give?
I think that more than ever, we have the opportunity to connect beyond our physical limitations. I think that even the pandemic itself has presented that opportunity, that we can sit on our devices and really, really push these algorithms, the social media platforms and whatnot, to be able to connect with people across the globe. I mean, this conversation is that in many respects, right? Like, we're using a platform like the Zoom platform. It's being streamed live, and, you know, people get to see us from anywhere, right? So I think there is a lot of opportunity. I think that makes me particularly hopeful about how to continue to exercise this global mindset. I think that if there is any advice that I could give, that I can present, is that we can work outside of our networks. That it really just takes a message, that it really just takes an email, that it really just takes a bit of effort, really. And I think, you know, again, as I was saying, this is that the project that Danny wrote about for Global Art Daily is that a part is an amazing example of an international network of people that came from the Americas. Had some participants that came from Hong Kong. One of the comments that was made in the chat from Tero in Gaborone in Botswana. And so I think that some years ago, I don't think in my mind, I think this was possible. And all of a sudden it's a reality. So again, I'm really, really excited about, you know, these global networks. I'm really excited about what can be done. And really, it just takes a message. It just sometimes takes a DM. Sometimes it just takes, you know, just getting outside of your comfort zones and being able to establish a conversation outside of our villages in many respects.
I love that. I love that. And Danny, you want to talk?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I admire about this panel is that everyone here is a hustler. I'm just going to say that. And what does that mean? That means you have a sense of direction, or you find a place where you want to be, and you do anything to get there. Be it self-publish an artist book, be it find the main editors of the main contemporary art publication in the Emirates and say, hey, I have an article, you want it? Bringing together artists from over, you know, what, 10, 20, 30 nationalities over a period of time, or finding new shelter in your home region or in a city that you think is ideal for the industries that you're interested in, right? Just sort of assigning value and purpose to a specific place, to a specific creation, to a specific moment in our careers, I think can be super, super exciting. And what happens for us as young creatives right now is that, as Johan was saying, we have the power of social media. surprisingly, I think people are much more willing to get texted and to reply today than a couple years back. I mean, getting a hold of a magazine editor 10 years ago was so hard. Emails would go to spam and all that. And I think today we have the power of DMs. Today we have the power of retweets. Today we have the power that sometimes when we have a clever idea at the right place at the right time with the right Wi-Fi connection, you can do a lot. And that's very exciting. That's very exciting. I think tips, personal tips, maybe learn a second or third language. Another tip, find a medium that you're not comfortable in, and as Julia is saying, hustle and slide into people's DMs. Yeah. What else can I say? More practical things for those of you who are interested in: build your artist portfolio, put a lot of love into your website. I'm looking at all of you because you've done such amazing jobs with that. I'm the one who has to catch up. And also consume the media that you want to see yourself reflected in. That works a lot. My little, and this is my cherry on top of my last comment of today, what helped me a lot in 2020 is reading the bios of people that I absolutely admired. Reading the bios of people that I wondered, how did they get there? Oh, they actually also went to school. They also were into the arts. They were also, right, finding the commonalities between people that I truly, truly admire and that person that I want to become was extremely comforting, because in times of anxiety, shout out to 2020, it really revealed to me that I was fairly in a very acceptable path that I could keep going in. So I just want to leave us with that. I don't know, Sophie, if you have any comments, Bernice, if you want to chip in as well.
Yes, please.
Very quickly on that, I think, throughout the last 4 years, Danny and I have really been partnering in terms of trying to figure out how to do this. And Julia is an amazing mentor who has, allowed me to really parse through how do you do this art thing. And I think there's a huge misconception that, it's only for people who have a lot of money, if you're rich, or if, you know what I mean. I think it's time. I think our generation is, I feel like I have the responsibility to start telling people that that's not necessarily the case. Your richness, your net worth is in your net worth. Your net worth is in your net worth. And the more you talk to people, the more you have conversations, the more you grow your value. And very quickly on that, so mentorship, I think, is definitely key. Having really great mentors. Doesn't have to be 10 years older. You can be someone a couple of years older. A friend can be a mentor to really help you parse through your ideas. And cold email is key. So, find the emails of editors, find emails of people that you want to reach out to, and just send them a note. The worst thing that you can hear back is a no or nothing. And in that statistic, you will get responses that are promising, and you will be able to create these connections. I slid into Augustine's DMs, and here we are. So
here we are.
Also, I have to add on to that.
Please.
There's a program that I'm facilitating about making it work. I'm trying to not break into the industry or whatever, but just diversifying your art income. And how, yes, this is also very, very true. Sliding into people's DMs, attending events that you're not even invited to, introducing yourself and taking up space whenever you're given the chance. And make sure that when you take up space, make sure that you're prepared to leave it also for the ones that come after you.
Yes, very important. Very important. And I think with that, we can conclude. Beautiful words spoken on Sheikh Zayed Road. Love it. We
are just arriving in El Circal, so if you see the "when have you arrived" thing,
that would be perfect.
We have arrived. Full circle. All of us have arrived.
All of us have arrived. No, I just want to thank all the panelists for this wonderful conversation. I think we all learned a lot from each other. And those positive words at the end, yes, I mean, I completely agree with everything. Reach out to people, build your network, and take up space, as Augustine says. 2020, I mean, I know we can't really see each other, etc., but we can take up space online. it's important to always kind of stay true to our authentic self, try to find out what that is. I know it's difficult, especially for people who have multicultural backgrounds. Trust me, I know it's been hard, but I hope you'll continue on that journey, and then you'll take up space once you find pride in who you are, as art practitioners, of course. And so with that, so I'll maybe if anybody has last words they want to share quickly, or it's all good. No,
I just want to say thank you
you,
to
GAD.
everyone.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Everyone was very kind. Everyone was.
Thank you, Johan, Julia,
you.
Bernice,
Thank you so
Augustine.
much.
Thank you to the
Thank you
audience.
for keeping me
Gracias.
company as well.
much. And this whole talk will be uploaded online too, so you know, anybody else can watch it afterwards.
Perfect. Salamat.
Salamat.
Bye.
Salamat. Paalam. Bye.
Ciao.